Every year, millions of gardeners lose 2 to 4 weeks of their growing season before it even begins. Not because of frost, not because of bad seeds, because they missed one structural task that had to be finished before March. And by the time they realized it, the biological clock had already moved forward without them. The mistake rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It feels like, I'll get to that next weekend. But gardens do not operate on weekend schedules. They operate on temperature thresholds, daylight accumulation, and microbial acceleration. And once those thresholds are crossed, you are no longer preparing. You are reacting. The reason this keeps happening is because gardening advice is usually generic. An aim in soil in early spring. Start seeds 6 weeks before last frost. Those instructions are technically correct and structurally incomplete. They ignore the most important variable in your garden, your zone's biological ignition point. A gardener in Zone 9 and a gardener in Zone 5 are not just on different calendars. They are in different phases of biological acceleration. And the task that determines whether spring runs smoothly or chaotically is completely different depending on where you grow. Today, I'm going to walk through exactly what that one critical pre-March task is for every major growing zone, and why finishing it on time is the difference between a season that flows and a season you spend catching up. March is not important because of the date on the calendar. It is important because of what happens beneath the surface. Across most of the country, March marks the beginning of biological momentum. Soil temperatures approach 45 to 50 degrees at 4 inches deep. That is the range where cool season seeds germinate rapidly and root systems begin expanding. Microbial populations shift from dormancy to activity. Perennials move stored energy upward into new growth. Weed seeds sense warming soil and prepare to sprout. Once this process begins, it does not pause. Growth does not wait for you to clear beds. Roots do not delay because you are still installing trellises. Momentum moves forward whether your infrastructure is aligned or not. Think of what comes next as the keystone task, the single action that unlocks the entire sequence. Without it, every action after it becomes compressed, rushed, or overlapped. And because compression compounds, the visible stress does not show up until May or June, when gardeners feel overwhelmed and cannot trace why. The keystone task is not identical in every zone. The principle is the same. Act before acceleration. But the specific action depends entirely on where you garden. Let us start with the warmest zones, Zones 9 and 10. Southern Florida, Gulf Coast, Southern California, Desert Southwest. In these zones, March is not the start of the season. It is the pivot into heat dominance. Your growing season may technically be year-round, but your productive window is defined by temperature bands. Cool season crops dominate through winter, but once daytime highs trend consistently into the upper 70s and 80s, bolting accelerates rapidly. The keystone task here is transition, clearing cool season crops and preparing beds for warm season dominance before heat forces the decision for you. If lettuce, peas, broccoli, and spinach are still occupying prime bed space in early March because you hoped for just a little more harvest, you are already compressing your warm season window. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and melons must go in as early as viable to maximize fruit set before extreme heat reduces pollination efficiency. In hot climates, a 2-week delay does not simply shift your harvest 2 weeks later. It can shift fruit set into temperatures where pollen becomes less viable and blossoms abort. That is yield lost permanently, not delayed, lost. The action is decisive and immediate. Harvest remaining cool season crops aggressively. Do not try to stretch them. Remove residues completely. Integrate compost. Install supports before planting. Harden warm season transplants fully. If you enter March still mid-transition, you are already sacrificing peak production. In zones this warm, February is your transition month. March is launch. Zones 7 and 8, the hinge zones. Mid-South, parts of the Pacific Northwest, coastal Mid-Atlantic. These regions sit at a structural intersection. March is when cool season planting begins outdoors and warm season crops must already be developing indoors. The keystone task is synchronization. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant require 6 to 8 weeks of indoor growth before transplanting. If your last frost is mid-April, seeds must be started in February. Waiting until March produces undersized seedlings with weaker root systems. Weaker roots delay early growth, and delayed growth shifts flowering later. Later flowering pushes fruit set into warmer conditions where pollination efficiency drops. That yield loss will not be visible until June, but the cause is February. This is the most commonly missed window in these zones because February does not feel like gardening season. It is cold. Nothing outside looks ready, but the clock is already running. While your outdoor garden looks completely dormant, your indoor seed starting setup should already be active. Trays under lights. Heat mats warming soil to 75 to 80 degrees for pepper germination. Tomato seedlings pushing their first true leaves. If none of that is happening and your last frost is 6 weeks away, you are behind and may not realize it until transplant day arrives with undersized starts. At the same time, cool season crops like peas and spinach must be direct sown 3 to 4 weeks before last frost. That means beds must be cleared, amended, and ready before March begins. If soil prep spills into March, cool season sowing is delayed. Delayed cool season crops mature into rising temperatures and bolt faster, shortening harvest windows. That creates overlap between removing cool season crops and installing warm season transplants. Overlap becomes congestion. Congestion reduces airflow. Reduced airflow increases disease pressure. The keystone in these zones is dual-track readiness. Indoor propagation already running and outdoor beds fully prepared before March arrives. Zones 5 and 6, where the largest number of home gardeners sit. Much of the Midwest, Northeast, and Mountain West. Soil may remain frozen or saturated through February. Snow may still be present. March feels premature, but this is precisely why the keystone task must be completed before March. The window between thaw and planting is shockingly short. In many parts of Zone 5, soil transitions from unworkable to ready within weeks, and the first planting deadline arrives almost simultaneously. There is no buffer between thaw and action. Peas must be planted 4 to 6 weeks before last frost. In Zone 5, with a mid-May last frost, that means early to mid-April. If peas go in 2 weeks late, you harvest during 80-degree weather instead of 65-degree weather. That single temperature shift can cut your harvest window in half. If you begin layout planning, compost staging, trellis installation, and irrigation mapping after thaw, you sacrifice the first critical planting window. Late peas mean weaker early harvest. Weaker early harvest increases reliance on summer crops. Summer crops overlap more tightly. Maintenance load spikes. The keystone in these zones is infrastructure finalization before thaw. Compost staged. Bed layout finalized on paper. Trellis materials purchased and cut. Irrigation components ready. Seed inventory organized by planting order. That means ordering seeds now if you have not already. It means sketching your bed map and knowing exactly which beds get cool season crops, which beds get warm season crops, and where your succession plantings will rotate through the season. It means having stakes, cages, and twine ready so you are not making hardware store runs during your first planting week. Every decision you make in February is one less decision competing with planting in April. And February is not downtime. It is design time. When thaw comes, you walk out and plant. Not plan. Plant. The biggest mistake in these zones is perfectionism in spring. Refinement can happen mid-season. Planting windows cannot be reclaimed. Design completed in February becomes execution in April. Design started in April becomes chaos in June. If you think this is just about planting earlier, it's not. Zones 3 and 4 face the tightest margins of all. Northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Montana, parts of New England, high-altitude mountain areas. Frost may linger into late May or even June. The growing season may be only 90 to 120 days. Every single day matters. The keystone task here is aggressive indoor propagation, combined with full season mapping before March. Peppers may require 8 to 10 weeks indoors. Tomatoes, 6 to 8. Brassicas, 5 to 6. If your last frost is June 1st, pepper seeds must be started in late March at the latest, meaning your indoor system must be fully operational before March begins. Grow lights positioned, heat mats tested, seed starting mix ready, trays labeled and scheduled. If you enter March without a functioning indoor setup, you are either buying transplants later, which limits variety selection and costs more, or you are starting seeds late and transplanting weak seedlings into a season that has zero buffer for recovery. But seed starting alone is not enough. Because your season is so compressed, succession must be mapped entirely before March. You do not have the luxury of figuring it out as you go. In Zone 9, a missed succession window costs 1 round of lettuce. In Zone 3, a missed succession window might mean no fall harvest at all. Early peas must be followed immediately by bush beans. Early lettuce must transition into fast summer greens. Fall brassicas must be seeded indoors while summer crops are still producing. Every handoff scheduled before the first seed goes into soil. In short zones, the plan is the infrastructure. The keystone is preparedness. Now here's the pattern underneath all of this. Regardless of zone, the keystone task shares one structural trait. It must be completed before visible urgency appears. In warm zones, the clock starts earliest, so the keystone is transitioning before heat forces the issue. In middle zones, the keystone is seed started and beds ready before the soil thaws. In cold zones, the clock starts late but runs fast, so the keystone is everything planned and propagated indoors before the compressed window opens. The common thread is anticipation. Every zone rewards the gardener who acts one phase ahead of where the garden currently appears to be. When the ground looks frozen, you should be starting seeds. When cool season crops look healthy, you should be preparing their replacements. When beds look empty, you should be installing infrastructure. The garden always looks calm right before it accelerates. That calm is not a gift. It is the last window you have. And this is the core principle that separates structured gardeners from reactive ones. The right task at the wrong time produces the same result as the wrong task entirely. A gardener in Zone 6 who finishes soil prep in February will outperform a more experienced gardener in the same zone who starts soil prep in April. Every single time. Not because of skill, because of sequence. The experienced gardener is reacting to conditions. The prepared gardener is executing a plan that was ready before conditions arrived. One late keystone task does not create one problem. It creates a chain. Late soil prep delays cool season planting. Late cool season planting reduces early harvest. Reduced early harvest increases reliance on warm season crops. Increased reliance means more plants competing in the same beds. Increased density reduces airflow. Reduced airflow increases fungal pressure. Fungal pressure forces reactive pruning that changes canopy structure mid-season. What appears in July as a bad disease year often traces back to a late February keystone. The gardener blames the weather, they blame the variety, they blame the soil. But the season was structurally compromised before the first seed went in. The garden rarely fails from one dramatic mistake. It falters from one quiet structural delay that compounds invisibly for months. And by June, the fixes required 10 times the effort that prevention would have cost in February. If you are watching this and realizing you have not done your keystone task yet, here is the honest assessment. Check your zone. Find your last frost date. Count backward. If you are in zones 9 or 10, your warm season transition should already be in progress. If you are in zones 7 or 8, your indoor seed starting should be happening now. If you are in zones 5 or 6, your infrastructure and bed planning should be finalized this month. If you are in zones 3 or 4, your indoor grow setup needs to be operational within the next 2 weeks. None of these tasks are difficult. None require expensive equipment. What they require is doing them before they feel urgent. Because by the time they feel urgent, the window has already narrowed. And a narrowed window does not just delay one task. It compresses the entire sequence that follows. The gardeners who have calm, productive seasons are not working harder in April. They are executing in February. They finished the one task that unlocked the rest of the sequence. Every zone has that one task. Find yours. Finish it before March, because spring does not start when you are ready. It starts when the biology says so. Structure before enthusiasm. Sequence before effort. Once it feels urgent, it is already late.